outdoor space. So that's where we're at there. So
great. And I'll post it on Twitter and Facebook.
that's exactly what I hoped you would do.
Awesome. Yeah. Once you send it to me, I can do that. Yeah.
I can only get into my own Twitter. So yeah, thank you. I'll get it to you. I'll get it to you first thing in the morning. Or if this meeting ends early enough, I'll get it to you tonight. My gosh, thanks. I took a ride over to my office today. It was like scary.
So I'm starting to record. So you're being recorded for posterity now. And I'm
Hi,
hitting
Penny.
yes, which will let attendees into the meeting as well. All right, where is?
Glasses. Oh, right there. Okay.
Yep. Okay.
One more minute to showtime.
Yep. And let's see who's in the attendees box here.
Julian, I sent you the link for the LPC. Linda will send you the.
You already did it?
I sent the link, but you have to give me some wording.
Community, all retailers and all restaurants and retailers in on the Upper West Side. Community Board 7 wanted to share. Invites you. Community Board 7 invites you to respond to LPC's wonderful survey about outdoor space. How's that?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Thank you.
Okay.
That's like, oh,
hey,
should
Andrew.
I submit this? With the minutes today. Thank you.
Yeah. Let's see.
Remember to write your name into the chat.
Oh, thanks.
Oh,
Yeah.
thank you.
Let's see.
Oops. Mark, for some reason, Rich Robbins is an attendee, not a participant.
I'll get him. Just give me a sec.
Okay.
What, Richard?
Okay, I know, Richard.
Okay. Let's give everybody just a couple more seconds to log in.
Mark, it's Clary. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
I think I might be only listed as an attendee because it's not looking normal, but I'm not
Nope,
sure.
you're there.
Am I a participant? Okay, thanks very much.
Somebody's got the TV on in the background. So, or a double something or other, because I'm hearing an echo. Bad enough to hear me once. Okay. Okay. Doing a quick quorum check here to make sure that we got quorum. Are the secretaries ready to roll?
You want me to take minutes, Sarah?
Yeah, is that okay?
Mark, can you just give me 1 second to open a document and then I'll be ready?
Yeah, please get yourself set. That'd be great. So I'm still checking the quorum. I think we have a quorum, but a couple more seconds would be even better. Okay. Yep.
Yeah, we have at least 15 members of the steering committee.
Yeah.
Yeah. I agree.
One of the things that we are eventually, and this is as much for Susan as anybody else, one of the things we ought to talk about at some point is what does a quorum of steering look like when there are co-chairs of some committees and one chair of another, and whether a quorum is the committees represented or the bodies. But obviously that's for another day, because right now we've got both. So Julian, let me know when you're ready to roll. You're all set? Okay, folks, so welcome to steering for June of 2020. Thank you all for being with us. And I have circulated an agenda, and we'll just jump right in. The first item on the agenda is to follow up on some recent conversations, both at full board and then some of it was by email chat in the ensuing or in the aftermath of some of our full board resolutions. If you're not speaking, could I ask you please to mute, because I'm getting some feedback here. Thank you. So a couple of different threads came out of all of that. And I thought it might make for a little bit of discussion tonight. There were two different threads that as I saw it. One were ways in which the conversations about equity and race and ethnicity and related concerns that were raised in both at full board and then in some of the emails that came after were a part of what we should be considering and thinking about in connection with the budget, in connection with the work of various committees and so forth. In that regard, some of those budgetary or more tangible issues are going to be raised, for example, with respect to youth and after school services at the YEL meeting this coming Thursday. Others of them will be raised by the HHS committee having to do with other aspects of it involving healthcare and a variety of other issues. I don't want to shortchange them by quick summary, but I hope you understand what I'm talking about. But there was also at least an apparent desire to have a broader conversation about the influence and role of equity, race, and ethnicity, and the issues that were raised in that email traffic as a part of a more general conversation. And one of the good suggestions that came through that series of dialogue was that this would be a conversation that we ought to have that's facilitated by somebody other than one of us. And to that end, I've been talking to a lot of you and a lot of others trying to figure out who that could be and how to put that together. At one point, I thought that steering might be the appropriate forum for that. One of the bits of feedback that I received was that steering might not be the ideal place to do this because it is committee chairs. The idea was that we would be not just one committee. But the idea that was suggested to me was that this ought to be its own standalone event rather than one of a number of agenda items on a busy night. With thanks to a whole slew of you, I probably shouldn't mention names, but it includes the Borough President's Office, includes various of you that have been kind enough to reach out to me or to whom I've reached out. We're getting a list of potential facilitators who might have some interesting ways in which to approach this subject. So it's our attempt to address the desire that I've heard from some of you about having a different conversation. I'll also mention that the desire to have such a different conversation is not unique to our board. I've heard from the chairs of CB8 and CB5, so the East Side and Midtown, who have an interest in doing this as well. Whether we would choose to partner with them or simply to share what we learn and how we approach this is to be determined. So I welcome any thoughts that anybody would want to share now in this space. We're not going to make final decisions on this right now, but I certainly want to hear from anybody that has a concern or an issue to address. I see Madeline has her virtual hand up, so I'm going to unmute Madeline. And then anybody else that wants to speak, I welcome the conversation. Thanks a lot. And Madeline, please go ahead.
Okay, you talked about Midtown. Each district is totally different. I don't know if they would have the same issues. It would be a general conversation, but each district have different needs. So generally, I think we all should get together and just show unity. But I think our issues are going to be totally different, and I don't know how those will be addressed.
Okay, that's a fair point. Thanks for that. Anybody else want to weigh in or have an idea that about how we're even whether we should do this? It seems to be on its own and on its way, but I welcome all thoughts and concerns about that. Jay, I see your virtual hand, your physical hand. Can you unmute yourself? Do I have to do it? How about now?
I did. I unmuted.
You're all set now. Go ahead.
Just a quick question, Mark. However you organize this thing on the issues that you summarized, I'm just wondering if the description of the discussion should be a little more focused in terms of the role of community boards, as opposed to just a broad discussion of race, equity, because that's so broad and open-ended. And if it's going to be in the context of community boards, I think it should be in that context of the functioning of community boards, the things that they do, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, so if your point is that we can't solve all race relation problems in the United States in an evening at a community board meeting, I think that might be a fair point. As I understand the desire to have the conversation, it is to create mindfulness in how we approach all the work that we do, as to how that work may or may not affect or be implicated by those issues. So I see Seema's hand and then I see Barbara's hand. So let's go in that order, and then anybody else that wants to in on this. Oh, Christian as well. Seema, do I have to unmute you?
Sorry, I got it now.
Okay.
I'm just building on what Jay and Madeline said, which is, I think we need to be clear about what the purpose is of the conversation. I've been through a number of these sort of workshops, and they can be in the sort of team building variety, which is us getting to know each other as a group better so that we can align our, our goals? Or is it more about a specific agenda, facing the community, and how can we align ourselves better to achieve that? I just think some clarity about the goal would be helpful.
So what do you think is the right goal and the right approach? Because this is very much an evolving thing.
I think it has to be a little bit of both. I think there needs to be some sort of introduction and some sort of common ground that we find before we can sort of attack these rather large problems. So, we need to be able to be honest and vulnerable, I think, in order to actually achieve these goals.
Okay, thank you for that. I think Barbara's next. Are you unmuted?
Yeah, I am. I was just wondering about the timing of this, because when Madeline spoke at the full board meeting so movingly, she was very anxious for this to move forward as soon as possible. So I think that, we should ask Madeline some of her feelings. I think some of the cues should really come from Madeline.
Well, I've had conversations with Catherine and Shelley, And we had, I think Catherine had lined up some people to speak. Is it at this meeting, Catherine? You have, can't hear you. There you go.
Well, it's still very much in process, but we are organizing a meeting, and I'll definitely send out the description once we have the agenda all set. But we're inviting speakers that can speak to some of these issues as they relate to youth's immediate needs in terms of health and community engagement and future opportunities and things like that. So we've had some great conversations, Madeline and Shelley and I. We've also been talking with YEL as they're also working on some of these issues this month. So we've had great conversations. We're moving in the right direction, and we'll definitely share that. But I think that's just share the agenda and the speakers once we have them finalized. But I think that's just the start. And so, Madeline, what do you think of kind of the bigger conversation?
Well, I want to answer Barbara a little bit again. Also, at the time when I spoke at the full board meeting, you know, everything, excuse me, was blown up and more killings. And I guess emotionally, I wanted things to happen at that moment. But I realize now it's going, but even though I'm looking for the summer, these kids having something to have money in their pockets and not look to steal or, you know, whatever they may do, it's going to reflect on public housing, and I might have been selfish in that. But all in all, it's a fact that they're going to need, their parents are not working, they're not working. And I did want to do it immediately, but I don't know how that was possible. So I'm glad to have that conversation with Catherine and Shelley. And it sounds like we're on the same page. So, but I feel now it's not going to be an immediate solution to this. It's going to have to be well thought out.
Thanks for that, Madeline. And I think that we sort of see there are two different paths here that HHS and YEL are addressing a variety of shorter, not short term, but more tangible responses to those concerns. And then there is still a desire to not lose the momentum of this moment. Pardon, boy, that's a horrible phrase, isn't it? Not to lose the momentum that we have now. To address a broader way of looking at how this intersects with our work. Christian, you're next if you want to unmute.
Sure. First, I'd like to thank Madeline for having brought the issue to the forefront. I think in the terms of the broader discussion, I guess we could aim to find out what the status is in our own district. You know, how things look in the Upper West Side. And then whether we fit in that environment.
Say that again, Christian. I'm sorry, I didn't quite catch.
Christian, you're muted.
I was saying, so in terms of the broader aspect of this,
yeah.
So we would like to find out. I think we want to find out what is the status of the Upper West Side in where it relates to race, equality, and all that. You know, how do we see it, and then how can we, the community, work and affect that?
Thanks, I got it now. I think Rich Robbins was next. Next hand I saw, and then I think I saw Doug as well.
Yeah, Mark, I think the way you broke it out as two issues of one looking kind of externally at budget impacts and impacts on the broader community as one issue, and the other is internally looking as the other issue is the right way of looking at it. And I think there have been some pretty strong statements that I think necessitate that we do an internal look just at our perspectives as a board, and whether there are things that we all need to be thinking about just in how we both deal with the board as itself and also as we deal with the board as part of the community and representing the community. So I do think there are two separate issues. Having said that, the second one, the internal looking, I think needs to be just the board. I don't think it should be combined with other boards because I think it is important that we look internally at ourselves and agree that it should be facilitated.
Okay, thanks. Doug is next, and then I see Melissa.
I'm really grateful that we're having this conversation. The only way we heal our country is healing our neighborhood, one neighborhood at a time, one gesture at a time. I'm so glad that we're having this conversation. I'm so grateful for Madeline being so passionate and, and waking us up. And I said before that I think it's more relevant to hear from people of color, but I also, I'm not going to get into the details, but so, a publication that came out that just said something particularly unfair. I think we really, on the internal look, I've worked in different companies where we've had various kinds of diversity training and really doing what they say in 12-step programs, a fearless moral inventory. I think we really should all look at ourselves and how we're doing. How are we being representative? How are we doing it? And there's I'm sure we have a lot of blind spots here that we're not aware of, and not intentionally. So yeah, the internal, the external, how are we doing self-checks on everybody? Are we, when we vote on any resolution, write a resolution, are we being mindful of gender, race, equity, everything? And just always be thinking of that from this point forward. And how do we do that? Is it possible that we have our own little internal workshop that maybe it's something that the borough president can help with on all community boards? I've participated in some diversity trainings that were fantastic, really opened my eyes to things that I didn't even realize I was thinking, or and then and then also just in our district, are there injustices happening, whether they be with the police department, housing, anything, everything. So I'm so glad that we're talking about this now. It's one of the most important things we could possibly do in the whole country.
Thanks, Doug. Melissa, and then I see Elizabeth Caputo's hand up, and then I'll look around for other hands.
Not to sort of restate what other people are saying, but I think both are important. So I don't know if these two kind of meetings, one being an inward looking sort of, how do we have our unconscious biases and how do they reflect in our work as a board, and the exterior being like, what kind of change can we affect to the community and to New York City as a community board and our elevated voice. I think both are important. And I just also want to make sure we don't lose sight of the latter, of like thinking through, like what kind of policy recommendations or something that we can actually like produce and affect change beyond just making sure we're more inclusive, which is definitely important. But like, I would love some kind of like program or something deliverable that like shows that we're willing to put our money where our mouth is, and ask our constituents to do so as well.
Okay, thanks. Christian, is your hand up again, or is that from last time?
No, it's all back.
So go ahead.
Okay, I just wanted to add that at one point the efforts through of Audrey and Polly, we voted to have a diversity task force that it never was. I don't think it was ever enacted, and maybe it would be time to revisit that again.
Thank you. And I just realized, I'm sorry, Elizabeth, I called on you and then I didn't see you. So I went.
No worries. And again, thanks everyone. My comment is really just, I think in order to do anything externally, we need to really look inward first at our board and how we act amongst each other, and also externally to our constituents. I would hope that anything we do moving forward as a board takes that into consideration. And then secondly, given how important this is right now for many of us and all of us, there is also a need for, I think having a safe space for this kind of conversation. So I would really encourage anything that we do, if we do bring in an outside facilitator, to make sure they are completely independent, potentially independent of even the borough president's office, somebody who can really talk to the 50 of us as board members without outside influence. So that's my comment.
Thank you. So I have been in contact with the borough president's office for support on this, but folks like Rich and Amy, Madeline, Kay, some community members as well, I see Beverly's hand, have also suggested folks that might meet what Elizabeth was just talking about in terms of people who are independent of any of our more structural relationships. So thanks for that. And that's part of the work in progress for sure. Bev, can you unmute yourself or do I have to do it? I guess I have to do it. Now try. I think you still have, yeah, there you go.
Okay, there. I think I support the direction that all of you are suggesting we follow in terms of an internal conversation to understand exactly where we have the common ground to move forward dramatically, and then external, some external focus as well that really can result in some absolute change where possible. What I do worry about, however, is that I have never seen the policy framework nationally, at the state level, and at the local level move as rapidly as it is now. Clearly, what the president said this afternoon about police reform sort of changes the picture of what anyone's expectations were. What Governor Cuomo said over the last week around a collaborative effort to reform police across the state. I mean, that again creates opportunities and areas where we might wish to weigh in as a board. So I just am concerned, given that we're looking at sort of staging over a month a set of conversations leading to resolutions, that essentially we'll be left behind by the moving, fast moving events. And I don't really know what to do about that, but I think it is of concern.
Thank you. I see Shelley has his hand up. Shelley, you don't appear to be muted on my,
Unmute yourself again, Shelley. There we go.
Shelley, you are unmuted. Can you, but we can't hear you. I welcome any ideas about what to do here from anybody more tech savvy than me.
When Shelley figures it out, then he can speak.
Yeah, I guess well, I think I don't see any other hands at this point. So I think we're about ready to move on. It strikes me that this is a bigger job than one person, nor should it be just one person's musings. So I'm happy to work with anybody who has a desire to help put this into motion. That does not have to be by a show of hands right now, but please email me perhaps tonight or tomorrow if you have either thoughts about how to translate this into a concrete action, or even better, a desire to help be a part of translating that, of that translation. I'm very glad that we seem to be in agreement that we need to build something here so as not to lose the momentum that came up from our recent meetings. And I'll do my best to serve in that capacity and welcome anybody else that wants to as well. Shelley, I'm going to give you one more chance here.
Mark?
Yeah, hello, who's that?
It's Audrey.
Hey, Audrey.
Hi, I don't remember exactly when it was. It was probably a year ago, December. I think it was the steering committee agreed to have a diversity task force where anytime we voted on anything, we would have a diversity impact statement. And that task force might be a great place for this conversation. Might be easier than having 50 people participate. Although needless to say, we all need the sensitivity training.
I think that's what Kristen just referenced, yeah.
Yeah, thanks for that. I don't know that task force ever was populated, but maybe now's the time. What do you think?
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah, okay. All right, well, great. So let's work on that. I don't think we can solve that part of it right now tonight, but that's a to-do for me and anybody who else wants to be in on that. Shelley, last call on this, and if you find I still see you as unmuted, so I'm not sure why it is we can't hear you. If you're able to hear me and can put it into whatever you wanted to say into chat, that might be another way to get around this. But other than that, I'm going to move on. Shelley, if you find the mic comes back to life, we'll call on you later, okay? But now we want to keep moving the agenda to the district needs statement planning. Everyone who's a committee chair, at least, on this meeting should have received a memo, a very detailed and thoughtful memo from our budget chair, Cindy Cardinal. Cindy, are you with us? I think you are.
Yep.
Great. So I thought we'd just take a couple of minutes to re-emphasize the, oh, is it 7 o'clock? Should we? It's quiet in my backyard tonight, so I'm sorry I didn't catch it, but anybody who wants to do the applause. And where's, meanwhile, Cindy, I'm going to set this up just to say that there was a particular focus to the work for the DNS and the budget priorities that Cindy laid out after a meeting with some great input from the budget committee, which is essentially Roberta and Bev and Cindy. And so, Cindy, do you want to just do a top line review of that and then take questions as they are, or however you want to approach it?
Sure. I mean, you know, we want to build on what we started last year, which is to have the committee chairs and the committees take ownership over the different areas of the DNS and budget priorities. And, you know, we had said that our emphasis this year was going to be about outreach and getting input from constituencies and you know, our leaders in government and agencies and you know, NGOs and community leaders. So, but then looking at this through the lens of COVID-19, we also said that there's going to be two things going on this year. It's going to be cuts to the budget that we're currently, you know, going to see in real time, as well as planning for the fiscal year 2022 budget, which is what we would normally be doing at this time. What we were addressing in the memo was asking the committees to maybe try to pare down priorities to the most pressing and essential needs because of the fact that we foresee being in the midst of such budgetary pain, and also recognizing that this is not going to happen in one fell swoop, that everything the city does is contingent upon money from the state. Everything the state does is contingent upon money from the federal government. I know my friends who vote budgets on Long Island are waiting, still haven't heard what their state aid cuts are going to be because the state hasn't heard from the federal government. So I think that it's going to come in maybe dribs and drabs, and maybe part of what we're going to have to do is, you know, just do some research and reach out to people to get their sense of what's coming down the pike, so that we're able to be part of the conversation and get ahead of it rather than just reacting to it. But our thought was by scaling back our DNS and refocusing it to address this particular environment would probably be more effective way to advocate for what we want.
Great, thank you for that. Are there any questions or follow-up for Cindy on that? Now would be a good time to ask those questions, as this is going to be coming up on your agendas in the next month and so a month and a half.
Yeah, right. That was the other thing we were asking for, some of your priorities by the end of July, so that we can then start working. If we could discuss it at next month's, if, you know, people can bring stuff to next month's steering, that'd be even better. But
yeah, and if I could just go ahead, please.
Will come before, yeah, sorry.
No, please.
October will be here before we know it. Like, I know that was the situation I was in last year. It's like it comes right up on you. So
yes. And Cindy will be leading our charge once again with respect to the budget consultations. Those are those meetings in September and sometimes October, in which agencies come to the Office of Management and Budget and confer with the community boards about their proposal for what will be the 2022 budget. To the extent that your identification of needs and even the first musings about budget priorities can be in hand before September, which basically is the July steering meeting, it can help us get put together those agendas for those consultations, and then we walk in with your thoughts in mind as we examine with the agencies. Any questions, any comments, any follow-up now from anybody? I don't see any hands raised, except I still have Shelley, and I'm assuming Shelley can't be heard.
All right, thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Question.
Go ahead, please.
I realize this is a very monumental undertaking, but I mean, I wonder if we really should also be monitoring where the expected budget cuts are going to come as it relates to each committee, right? I guess that's what Cindy was saying. What is most emergent? I mean, is it possible, and forgive me, any committee, is it possible that any committee on our board is not going to have some of the needs of any particular committees may actually fall off the wayside because of how dire the budget is, or am I?
I'm not sure what you're asking.
Well, what I'm saying, obviously, I totally agree with Cindy that we have to rethink this, because there's going to be major cuts coming to just about every part of government, right? So I guess my question is, of all of our 9 committees, are there any committees that aren't going to have a DNS? In other words, that would sacrifice their needs for some of the other more emergent issues in other committees? Or is that not appropriate? I haven't thought it through, and perhaps that's a ridiculous statement, but we're going to have to sacrifice a lot. So I'm just wondering if there any subject matter here that is actually going to be off the table for this year because of the crisis we're in.
I mean,
go ahead, Cindy, please.
yeah, I mean, are you saying something along the lines of, let's not advocate $30 million for the Soldiers and Sailors Monument in this time? I would say probably that wouldn't be number 3 on our list this year, just because it's so massive and it's almost tone deaf to ask for that much money for a monument when people aren't eating and children aren't getting educated and police are killing people. So yes, I think, I think that there are, I wouldn't say that it would be a committee-wide thing, but I think that if we look to prioritize, I think what I said in the memo was, what we can do, what's doable, and what's essential, and what our real priorities are. One of the things, Mark, this probably isn't the time to do this, but I was thinking today in terms of, normally our DNS and budget needs, the police, fire, and like sanitation is sort of Penny's domain. Would this be a good year to maybe expand that to include some representation from the community board members as well, to discuss that? Because usually it's just like this pro forma thing. We've got great sanitation, we've got great police, we've got great fire, but with the budget situation we're in now, maybe we need to, I don't know. What do you think?
Off the top of my head, I have 2 reactions. The first is that there may well be an integral part of how we deal with uniformed services as part of the concerns that are raised. Certainly everyone has by now heard about a proposal to reallocate portions of the NYPD budget to other uses, especially in the absence of funding for, I'm going to say youth programs, but it could be any number of other social services programs. So to a certain extent, that is going to be a part, an integral and sort of organic part of the work that you're encouraging everybody to do. At the same time, I don't want to lose track of the fact that there are also relationships with the local service providers of those uniform services. Our district manager is a master of that and maintaining good relations there and understanding what they confront as well. So that's the baby I don't want to throw out with the bathwater in terms of creating a workable proposal with respect to how our budget priorities and district needs intersect with those relationships and intersect with those issues. I see Jay has his hand up, and I'm not sure if there are others. Jay, go ahead.
I would just quickly second what Doug said, and it may be, and I don't know specific programs, but this may be the time in our community to single out those absolutely essential human needs in the context of what's happening, in the context of the pandemic, in the context of a city budget that on many levels will be decimated, and pick out the things that are so essential and so important, like our youth programs, like food security, like essential basic housing, 3, 4, 5 issues that are just so important on a human level, and make a strong statement in support of those, with a statement from our board communicating the fact that in past years, we've had a lengthy district needs statement with various things, but that on a purely human basis, these 4 things or these 5 areas are what we're concerned about. That is our district need.
Yeah, thank you. And I think that's what Cindy is referencing in that memo. Cindy, with your permission, I think we should circulate that memo to the whole board, not just to the various committee chairs on steering, because
I'll be happy to do that.
Yeah, okay, great, thank you. Christian, I see your hand.
Yes, I just wanted to not lose sight of the fact that even though what Jay said is on point, there are certain processes that are in place that we as community board have to follow. And one of which is the DNS, regardless of what we come up eventually with what will be the main priorities of the board, each committee is still going to have to come up with their own priorities no matter what. So we will have to go through that process. But as a board, as a whole, we will certainly concentrate on what's essential going forward. Yeah.
Great. Okay, I don't see any other hands on this, so unless there, oh, Catherine, are you raising your hand?
Yeah, just very quickly. In HHS, there's a lot of urgent issues always, and especially right now. And the DNS serves as a very important informational document that we rely on for the whole year. So we do research, we publish it, and we learn a lot from that process. So I think in being more concise and focused about our priorities, I think that's a great idea. And will probably involve a lot of discussion. But I agree with Christian that we shouldn't lose sight of the value of going through the process as committees and producing kind of a robust document that at least for HHS, we rely on it throughout the whole year. So I just wanted to emphasize that as well. Thanks.
Thank you. Any other comments on this before we move on, except for my thanking Cindy for driving this so expertly. Yeah, it's a huge job, often thankless, although I'm trying to remedy that. And the task, as you saw in a previous steering meeting about the complex web of issues that we confront, trying to boil that down to a box you can check on a website is a gigantic undertaking, and Cindy did it almost single-handedly last year. And so I'm particularly grateful, and I think we all are. So thank you for that. Great, I'm gonna move this along then. There's a quick note on the agenda for steering about committee agendas, and there's 2 points I wanna raise here, and then if there are follow-up, then please help me. First is planning ahead. It is still an important thing to do to make sure that we get our agendas for every committee put together well in advance, especially in a time like now when we are relying so much on digital presences. I want to say a quick shout out to our co-secretaries for putting us onto Link NYC as well as social media, not part of their job description, so thank you for the extra work.
Just clarifying, that's all Julian at this point. Thank you, Julian.
Okay, well, fair enough, and kind of you to say. But we don't have flyers at this point, and we're not putting up notices in other paper form. And there is a part of the community that we lose when we don't do that. Not that we have anything, not that we can right now, but there you are. So it's even more important that the digital or online ways in which we advertise our agendas be up and as complete as possible, as early as possible. Absolute drop dead date is full board, but hopefully the week before is really essential. And you know that I'm encouraging everybody to take part in that process. I did want to clarify one aspect of that, which is that while the generation of ideas for those committees that don't have their agendas driven by applications to city agencies, and even those that do have application-driven agendas but want to take up additional topics or issues, all of which we've seen in this last in the first 2 quarters of this year. It is the role of the committee chairs, when, if necessary, in consultation with me, but it is the role of the committee chairs to figure out what is appropriate for every given month and every given agenda. So we hope to accommodate all users, but there are a lot of nuanced decisions to be made in putting together an agenda. And I think we all rely on, and I certainly rely on, our committee chairs to be the arbiters of that. And I am there as your facilitator and backstop, not as a decider per se. That said, so I encourage everybody, we will, other than preservation, there won't be meetings in August, but we do still have a July set of meetings to talk about. I would be looking to you for those inputs, and then of course the minutes and agenda and resolutions that come after it. I have on the agenda a full, I'm sorry, is there any comment or question about that before I move on? Stephen, I see.
Hello.
Hey, Shelley's here.
Yeah.
All right.
I think I can put together my comment and what you just said with everything else I wanted to say.
Wow, that's multitasking. Go for it. And then we'll go to Stephen, and I think I saw one other hand too. Barbara, was it? Okay,
So
go ahead, Shelley.
I'll start with the original thing. The fact is that the meeting on the 25th is because we think there are things we can do, tangible things, to move the progress for summer youth employment and other things that can be done directly to affect the community. So that's that. The larger picture is important, but I think I agree with the people who said that it starts with our own community board. And some of those things relate to the information people get. There's no reason, if there's a good agenda item affecting a part of the community, hopefully it's affecting the whole community. I walk 6 miles a day. I'll print out an agenda and put it on every place that's possible. Okay, and give it to people in parts of the community and say, please put this up in your elevator. It's the outreach we do, who we're outreaching to, that is the big issue with diversity involvement in our community. I meet people, particularly in the NYCHA community of Frederick Douglass houses, and they tell me that they didn't like what we did. And I said, well, you could have come to the meeting. Well, we didn't know, no one really reached out to us. It's not enough to post things on a website. It's not even enough to put things in posters and put them up in places. If you want to involve people, you got to go out to the people and say, what are you feeling? Please come, or we'll find a way to express it. And I think that's the big issue. Who do we represent? Do we represent the whole community? And we have found at times that certain groups come and we say, wow, we really support what they're doing, but we didn't know they existed. Okay, it's a particular interest group. Well, certainly that works around race and other issues. So on the immediate issue about getting out things about agendas, any committee that wants an agenda, my wife and I will cover the whole from 59th Street to 110th Street, from the park to the river. And anyone else who wants to join will have a team, an advertising team. By the way, all of our stuff is up on the kiosk. tonight's, I saw our tonight's meeting, virtual steering meeting, maybe 50 times in different places. But I think that, and that's important, but the outreach has to be where the outreach usually doesn't go.
Thanks, Shelley. Thanks. I think we're next. You're going to hear from Stephen, and then I see Barbara Adler has her hand up. And then Madeline had her hand up, but then now it's down. So not sure if there's more there. Stephen, you're next, and then Barbara.
Yeah, I wanted to comment somewhat a little unrelated, but under topics, or I should say certainly meetings. I just wanted to take a note. I know that youth came up quite a bit in terms of some of the emails and of topics. I thought to make sure that I made sure everyone knew what is posted, but a little bit more elaborate, that we have a meeting on Thursday. It will be about youth. Unfortunately, Blanche had a technical problem today, so I'm really speaking for her because she has really put this together. I think we're going to have a great meeting. We have wonderful speakers. This meeting will talk about programs. It will talk about needs. It will talk about equity. It will talk about budgets. And just for some people who have not gone to YEL, these are pretty consistent things that we talk about on a month-to-month basis. So we'll continue to do that. But I hope and encourage, I wrote down a lot of notes of people who make comments. So I hope I see you there because I'd love to have your input. And we are going to come out. The plan is to come out with a resolution. So if you want your say in a resolution, we'd love to hear it at a committee instead of the full board because it's a lot easier. So I just wanted to put that out there and just make sure that that everyone sort of knew that. But as a background, Catherine and I spoke a little bit as well. So she put out an email to the board. I'm not a huge board emailer, although I was guilty once this month, but we sort of planned and sort of divided and conquer. So Catherine's on our board. So I just want to take time to say and make everyone understand challenges about our youth are acknowledged. We have addressed and come up, but I think is a pretty good game plan to address those. And I hope and encourage and anticipate a healthy turnout because I think we've all talked about how important it is. So that's that. I just wanted to make sure I commented. There was one thing I wanted to make sure everyone understood. The Summer Youth Employment Program has been mentioned multiple times in multiple levels. I don't know if people are aware, some may. We already made a comment about that earlier in the summer when this first came out and it was an urgent need. We decided to send a letter because we did not want to wait for the meetings. So, and I want to thank Rich Robbins. He was involved in a good collaboration of a non-committee member. But we already sent out a letter, and Mark, maybe if you want to share that, but we commented, it was on our DNS from last year, so we could, and we sent out a very quick and urgent note that this should be. So we as a board have commented in a letter, and we chose to do that because we didn't want to wait, and people say we don't want to wait 20 days or 30 days. So there is already a statement. So I also wanted to fill everyone in on that CB7 has made a comment on SYEP and the urgency in funding. And as always, Mark was very helpful in putting that together. So that was the things that I wanted to share, Mark.
Thanks, Stephen. Catherine, I see your hand is up. Barbara, will you let Catherine go first just because I think she's responding to Stephen?
No problem.
Thank you.
Of course.
So excited about the meeting on Thursday, and I'm sorry that Blanche couldn't be here. Thank you for all those comments, Stephen, for clarifying. I just wanted to clarify that I did not send an email out to the whole board, just YEL and HHS and a couple others. So if you didn't get that email from me, it's not that you weren't included. I sent it to those committees. But it's great for us to share what we're doing with the whole board, and maybe we can find a better way to do that. But I just wanted to clarify that.
Thanks a lot. And now we're going to go to Barbara. And I think I saw Rich. Did I see your hand? Yeah. Okay. So Barbara and then Rich.
Okay. I just wanted a little bit of clarification about how the agendas get developed, and I didn't quite understand what you were saying. I had thought that we developed the agenda for our next month within the committee, but then often when the agenda is published, we see that they're quite different. Things have changed, and for a committee member, it's very easy to feel somewhat marginalized when things that you've said are just discarded with no explanation.
Okay, well, I think we're finding our way with a new process. If that is a consistent problem, then you tell me. Okay, I think that's the answer there. Rich, I think, go ahead, Barbara.
But what I was asking you is exactly, I wanted clarification on how the agenda actually gets developed. Is it developed with a committee? Should it be developed with a committee?
The idea is that if there are ideas for agenda items, then they should be shared with your committee chair. If there are issues about whether or not they're appropriate or when to put them on the agenda or how they should be organized, hopefully the committee will be able to work that out. And I am a backstop in that process if there are concerns. So that's the best answer I can give you. Because every committee is a little bit different, so I don't want to be painting with too broad a brush. So let's turn to Rich. I think you had your hand up.
I did, and it was in response to Steve's comment about SYEP, which I see as just so essential for New York City. I put it into chat, and I see Julian and Courtney have responded to me already. In a recent meeting, and I forget which one of ours that Gail was on, she responded to me in chat. I think the words were SYEP will get funded. And I was wondering if that was definite or if that's still up in the air. And what Courtney just wrote is she reached out to April and Gail's office after that comment. She told me it's still being negotiated, but they have high hopes that nothing is set in stone. I'm always brought back to the statistic that came from a Wharton study that said that the mortality rate of those who are randomly selected for SYEP is lower than those who are not. The impact of that program is just extraordinary. To think that for youth, they have a higher likelihood of dying in normal circumstances if they're not selected for SYEP. Just the trajectory it has for people who are not randomly selected. So anything we can do, and I know we already, as Steve said, sent out the letter, but anything more we can do, that program is just critical.
Thanks. Thank you. And I don't see any other hands on this, so I'm going to move.
Mark, I was just going to say to Rich's point, Helen Rosenthal was at our last meeting.
Oh,
she did make a comment that, and she's on the budget committee. She specifically said, "Don't worry, that will get a minimum partially funded or more funded or be funded," which isn't take it for what it is. But she seemed very, and other people were here. She seemed pretty, don't worry, that'll get funded or partially funded was her comment. To what extent that means, I'm not sure. But she made the confident, and my takeaway is that program will get funded, at least partially.
Yeah, thanks for that. I actually see that Courtney Clark Matakis has her hand up. Courtney, can you unmute?
I should be unmuted.
Okay, go ahead.
I actually just wanted to go back to the comment about making sure that we are reaching out to different constituencies and making sure they're aware of the meetings and the agendas. It's actually something we had talked about in the communications task force last year. In fact, literally this exact same topic. And I think, that Linda and Roberta and Cindy and Lolita and I had all talked about, and Julian, I think was there too. Yeah. The importance of making sure that we had representation and had come up with a lot of great ideas of how to reach out and find influencers and people who could carry that message into the community. And I think to the point now that we can reach out with social media is important, but it almost to the point we made earlier, more important to revisit that idea and really make sure it comes to fruition, to reach out to the people who are influential and committed in communities that may not be actively tracking us on social media. So I just want to make sure that was brought up, that we had talked about it, and maybe we need to revisit it with more, with a little more attention now.
Thank you. Thank you. Very good. All right. So I don't see any other hands. How we do that outreach in this environment is, of course, an additional challenge. But we do need to bring forward the work that you guys did last year. Great. There is, before we get to the lead bill that I want to bring to your attention, we didn't put on the agenda, my bad, a review of the full board agenda coming up. I'm going to share a screen and try to find that. Give me 1 second. Here it is, I believe. So I'm sharing the full board agenda. This is the full board agenda, which will also bring up the issue of the order of the full board agenda. And I'm willing to try another month of putting the business session first, although we see the complications of trying to balance elected officials who come when they come with trying to get our work done. And I think this month we're going to have a couple of resolutions that will be that will generate some community pushback or feedback. I'm aware that our own Paige Cowley wants to talk for a moment about the Preservation Committee resolution, and I'll give Paige the floor in a moment. And then there's a Parks and Environment resolution that's joint with transportation. No, I'm sorry, not the one that's joint with transportation. It's the enforcement of dog leash laws in Central Park that I've already heard may be the subject of community or, well, community comment and so forth. Even though the agenda reads as being a little bit on the short side, I don't think that that's necessarily going to be a short meeting per se. So I'll entertain questions or concerns from committee chairs about the agenda order and topics that are going to be controversial. And to kick off the latter part of that, I'll ask Paige to unmute herself and go ahead and speak to your concerns.
Thank you, Mark. I'll be brief. First of all, Michelle, I'm sorry I wasn't available to be at your meeting, your virtual meeting last Thursday. My work sort of interfered, but I did go through it, and I went through it after Landmark West, for full disclosure, ended up hearing a presentation by the same architect, and Melissa Rosenberg was present, just to keep a level playing field. I think I saw the same presentation you did. There were a few things, though, that really disturbed me when I heard that the resolution had passed, and these are the three. First of all, I'm curious as to whether this committee actually reads any of the early designation reports. It's really essential, particularly for some building like this. You need to know that the building was one of the first 50 within the year of being selected as an individual landmark. In those days, believe it or not, the designation reports were only 2 or 3 pages. Now they take up a whole meeting. A whole ream of paper. So the issue is that you're dealing with a very special building, one that was singled out because it had problems initially. I don't know, have I been lost because I have a different picture on my screen?
We can hear you, go ahead.
Okay, sorry. The second issue is about the scope of work. And this is the second bite at the apple, the second master plan. The first one was in 2011. The architect that presented actually put the cafeteria and the gift shop on 77th Street, and they chose bronze. All the repair work that was done in 2011 was bronze. And the architect actually stated that 2 years ago, they put a test storm window on 76th Street, and it was that window that caused the condensation, which took them 2 years to find and rectify. And that was because they built walls in front of the windows. So the issue is about the appropriateness here. This leads to my third point. We are, as a committee, we look at the appropriateness relative to the rarity or the designation or the rarity of the architect or a detail. And one of the issues that really disturbed me is this is the first time in my career that I ever saw an architect or an applicant give a cost estimate for anything. If you read the landmarks law, they specifically exclude cost because they want to have it be level. Anyone can live in a landmark. anyone can repair it. It's nobody's business how much money something costs. And here we know that this institution has had financial trouble again and again, but they're planning for a $60 million new building on 76th Street, and they still haven't fixed their original home. So I think one of the important things here is to realize that there should be no discussion of money that comes up. And I'm just shocked that they pushed the community board into a corner. And of course, you're going to try to make friends and support the institution, but that's not the way to do it. They need to meet their costs with the budget they have in hand to maintain a building that they haven't been doing so. The executive director said that the building had had no maintenance in 15 years. So,
okay. So Paige, I'm going to ask you to wrap up because we're now debating the resolution rather than talking about the issues that it raises.
I understand, but these are things that go in a resolution. So I'm only asking before the full board meeting, if perhaps you guys could have your own conversation. I'm willing to participate. I will share documents with you and make sure that we're not making a mistake here. This is a very rare building, and I thank you for your time.
Thanks, Paige. I see hands from Roberta and Madge, and I'll take you in that order. Roberta, try unmuting now. You're still, yep, but go ahead.
So I think if you're going to do the business session first, you have to let the electeds know that we're doing the business session first. They're usually quite agreeable if we tell them in advance what the plan is.
So let me just respond. I have done that the last 2 months. I've given them very specific times at which we would expect to hear from them. Obviously, the last meeting, we had a bit more in the business session than we anticipated, but they were showing up when they showed up. So your point is absolutely correct, but I've done that. I'll do it again.
Why don't you say that even if they show up, I mean, sometimes they just show up just because they want to be there, that we're going to complete the business session first and see if that works.
I'll give it a try, but okay, thank you. That's a good point.
Because the last meeting ended very, very late. And it seemed like every time we started discussing something, it went on for hours and hours and hours.
I'm not going to respond to that, but thank you for that comment. I think Madge was next, and then I see Elizabeth and then Michelle, if I can take you in that order. So Madge, go ahead.
Can you just quickly tell the good news about the building on 96th Street, about the church?
Well, since you brought it up, why don't you share?
Well, the Landmarks Commission heard it again, and the architect gave a new proposal with much more respectful to the ceiling and the height of the elevators. And I think everybody will be happy with what comes out. It was a win-win.
Thanks. That's the First Church of Christ Scientists, the 361 Central Park West. Thanks, Madge. And I think Elizabeth, did I call on you next, and then Michelle?
Yeah, sure. I don't know if are we talking about the Parks and Environment resolution yet, or is that next?
We're talking about things that may generate discussion and public comment.
Sure.
So go ahead.
Yeah, so on that front, I mean, Clara can weigh in if she'd like, but I thought we had a robust conversation last night about the issue. I actually was surprised that it was not more contentious, and believe hopefully we will, if we stick to sort of what the nature of the resolution is, which is about enforcement, hopefully it will be a not a lengthy conversation. But one that is as productive as it was last night. So my only other point, Mark, is just about the business session and how you're planning to run this with elected officials. I'm only speaking from my 3 years of experience. I don't know how you feel about this. I feel like if we give elected officials a chance to come and talk, whether it's the beginning of the meeting or the end of the meeting, I don't know what your policy is on sort of stopping a meeting for somebody to speak. So I understand if it's Congressman Nadler who shows up in the middle of our business session and we need to let him speak. But I also think we have had elected officials who come and they speak for more than a couple of minutes. They repeat each other. I think it's imperative that staffers from their teams know sort of that we're under time constraints for our meetings, and they need to really stick to topics that are germane to our district, and anything else they can put in an email and send to us. So that's,
thanks.
or they can do a town hall on their own.
I promise you that each of the last 2 months, I've done everything that you just suggested in terms of providing them with comments about what it is that they might want to address us or include in their address to us, and the timing of it and so forth. This is a conundrum, and I'll continue to work on it.
I know it's not on you. It's just, I think it's just more like, you know, at some point we just have to stop. Like, we're all volunteers. We're all tired at 7, 8, 9 o'clock at night. And there's an element of respect I think they owe to us as volunteers as well. So
Thanks. I will try a different tack this month and see if that has any better traction. Thank you for that. Elizabeth, on the first point with respect to the P&E enforcement resolution, I'm aware that there's already been outreach from media outlets in response to the committee adoption of the resolution. So I anticipate that there will be folks at that meeting who want to be heard. So this is the meeting management portion of our discussion. So there'll be something to manage is my only point there, not whether or not a comment on the resolution itself.
Thanks for letting us know that. Thanks.
Thank you. Michelle, I think you're next, and I don't see another hand after that.
Thank you. I want to respond to what Paige said, if I may. Paige, I don't want to make this personal, but you apologize for not being at Landmarks at our meeting. And after what you said this evening, it would have been great to know a little bit more about what you and Landmarks West know before we, while we were in our preservation committee meeting, notwithstanding the fact that you were not there, but Landmarks West could have sent another member of their committee. And two, would have been nice if you had this evening before this meeting sent me an email, me and Kay, and maybe even, and of course, the rest of my team, to say, this is what you're going to say about this particular issue with the New York Historical Society. So,
I'm sorry, I'm going to interrupt here. We're getting into the territory of what is actually going to be the debate at full board. Because I let Paige go on a bit about, or share a bit about, go on a bit, that's not the way I wanted to phrase that, forgive me. Because Paige got to some of her specifics, Michelle, I'm indulging that a little bit with you too. But I really think that this is the discussion to be had at full board. And so I will take this offline if it needs to go anywhere. But I thank you both for weighing in. And we'll take it on that basis. And so.
Thank you, Mark. I just want to say that at no point ever does preservation not want to work with Landmarks West.
Great. We want to work with the whole community, and I know you work hard, and I know you work hard to do that. Very good.
And this was not the point. This was not the place to bring up particulars such as, does the committee read the designation reports?
Thank you. And I will note that the applicant included the designation report in the materials that they circulated to all of us.
Thank you.
Thanks for that. And I will also note that Paige raised this issue with me just prior to this evening's message. And so I was grateful for that heads up that there was going to be this conversation. But I think that that's all there is to say about that for right now. That doesn't encroach upon the meeting we're going to have. I don't see any other hands about either the full board agenda order or the review of the full board agenda itself. If anybody has any other concerns about meeting management in terms of business items, I see your hand, Michelle, business items that may generate more than the usual amount of discussion, let's talk about that now. Michelle, I'm going to call on you.
Thank you. If you would like to incorporate July and August's Preservation Committee agenda, if you think that would be better to do, I'm sure nobody on the committee would be against that. That's all I want to say about that. Thank you.
What I understand Michelle to be referring to is that our committees typically do not meet and the full board does not meet in August. But because the Landmarks Preservation Commission will not wait for us if we don't hear people in August. There's been a history for the last, 3-4 years of meeting in August, or at least scheduling a meeting in August. I will work with the committee chairs of preservation to see what, to look at the volume of applications and see whether we can hold only one meeting that kind of bridges between August and July and August. We don't want to force you to come to a meeting if there's nothing to do. But we'll do our best to make sure that we don't lose our voice in those applications. I see Stephen with a hand. Please go ahead.
Oh, I just wanted to make a comment and a suggestion, and first give you a little support. I think it's a very difficult thing to do. So I think you're doing a good job and doing the best you can, and you've done a great job getting us on technology. So there's been a lot of, you have done, I'm not gonna say people said you did things wrong, I think you're doing a good job, and I think you're doing a great job, so thank you. The only point that I would say is on some of the larger issues, I would limit the time. I mean, I think we sometimes go back to people 2 and 3 times, and I wouldn't do that. I mean, I would just, if we're talking about an issue, we should all get a chance to talk. Sometimes we're going back 2, 3, 4 times, and that really adds a lot of time, and that's banter. So my suggestion is on some of these larger issues that everyone get limited to one conversation, to one speak, one time, and I would make that the policy. If it was quick, where there's only 2 or 3 people, perhaps I trust you to use your common sense. But I think that would be something that I would recommend, particularly while we're on Zoom, because it takes up a lot of time. That's my suggestion.
Thank you for that suggestion, and obviously it is the desire to have the committee chairs run the business session. So to that extent, I will certainly empower the committee chairs to adopt that rule, but we should announce it in advance. So any committee chair that wants to adopt that rule, you have my support, but we should announce it at the top. In effect, collect all your thoughts and share them only once. Thank you, Stephen, for that. Roberta, you have your hand up on that, or at least you have your hand up. I'm not sure if it's on that.
Sorry about that.
Not at all.
Technical difficulties. Our bylaws actually support that. Our bylaws state that we can limit conversation to only one person, each person speaking once, and we can limit the amount of time they're allowed to speak. So that was in our bylaws.
Thanks. So let's empower ourselves to be economical that way, and I'll do my best to reinforce that and support that. I see Doug's hand. Go ahead.
Yeah, when we decide to limit someone, the amount of time on a particular issue for members of the public, obviously at your discretion, or if we're going to, it's 1 minute, 2 minutes, whatever it is, I think we could do a better job at giving the speaker notice that their time is running out. I think we can give visual cues or audio cues with, being very respectful, because I think sometimes people intentionally go over, and some people don't even really know that they're at their 2 minutes. So if someone has 2 minutes to speak, maybe we give them a 30-second warning. Maybe I've watched a lot of city council hearings lately on Zoom, and they have the countdown clock, and someone, sergeant of arms, says time, but it's a little abrupt sometimes. But I just think we could do a better job of it, because I think when people know where they are in that 2 minutes or 1 minute or 3 minutes, whatever, I think they'll cooperate, especially if we keep reminding people in a friendly way.
Thanks, Doug. And with Rich Robbins' help, and also the help of Noel Hidalgo, who is from Beta NYC, the company that is in effect the incubated IT function of the borough president's office, and they do a great job. It is they who put together Zoom for us, for example. They're trying to research for us how to have one of those timers as one of the windows that you see on your Zoom screen. So far, we haven't gotten that figured out yet, but we're working on it, and I thank you for that. I want to move us along. It's 7:45, and the next thing I have on the agenda is a resolution that I would like to put forward to you. Its origins are in work that our board did with respect to the proposal to build a nursing home on West 97th Street, which a community member paid out of his own pocket to have a series of soil samples done in the parking lot that was going to be transitioned into a nursing home building. And lo and behold, not only did it discover lead contamination, but arsenic and cadmium. I mean, the list of heavy metal toxins was rather staggering. And the concern, of course, this in effect triggered an environmental impact statement. One can have one's points of view about how well or not so well that environmental impact statement dealt with those contaminants, but it was absolutely the case that they were there. One of the things that our board commented on in connection with the draft environmental impact statement was not only did the soil analysis reveal that the lead levels were higher than those that were permitted under current standards, but scientists were talking to us even at that time about the standards themselves being a problem, because everybody agrees that, especially with young children and the elderly, the acceptable standard of lead exposure in the bloodstream is 0, and the standard for exposure that might lead to lead in the bloodstream was far greater as a federal matter than it should be, and as a state matter. So as a result, there has been follow-up work by, among others, legislators who serve our district. Brian Benjamin in the New York State Senate and Danny O'Donnell in the New York State Assembly are sponsors of essentially the same bill in the 2 houses that would lower the lead levels. And I'm going to try to pull up the, give me 1 second here. And what I'm showing you here, I circulated, why isn't this working? There we go. I circulated this resolution to you all earlier over the weekend. And there is a correction. I mistakenly drafted this to say that the EPA never adopted the standards that the court was advocating. What actually happened is that the EPA received input, proposed new rules, and then sat on them for over a year, and then adopted standards for, this is in the soil and, I'm sorry, on floors and windowsills that were a lot less strict, a lot less remediative than the ones that were proposed to it by the court and the advocates. And they did not adopt the airborne or soil level, or revisions to the airborne and soil level of lead that were recommended by the CDC. So the bill that is before the state legislature, so there's a slight correction there. There was an adoption of standards, but it didn't go anywhere near as far as the CDC or the experts recommended. So the bills would adopt the standards that are the best practices as recommended by a team of experts that include those at the CDC, but there are also other research scientists who have come together and have informed the Senate and State Assembly bills. I also circulated to you the link to those bills, which included the bill memo about that. And so this is a request that we take up a resolution to support that legislation and bring this issue to a vote on the floor of the legislature. The legislative session is more or less over for this year, but it may be called back into session for some things. Adopting this resolution now will help set the table for this to be considered either in an emergency session of the legislature over this summer, or more likely when the legislature reconvenes next January. I put up here the edits so you can see them, and I invite your comments, questions, and concerns. And in order to do that, I have to end share so I can look around for hands. I'm not seeing any hands. Are there any members of the public that want to be heard on this? Whoops, now I see one hand. Let's see, that is Jay. Oh, I should have mentioned Jay, that I'm grateful to Jay for his having employed the use of our legislative task force to solicit input on this before I put this on our agenda. Jay, do you want to pick it up from there?
Yeah, this certainly doesn't appear to be any technical issues. And as I mentioned, all of these bills, before a bill is introduced, it's reviewed by a bipartisan, or should I say nonpartisan, bill drafting commission. Both houses appoint a commissioner. So generally, it undergoes a scrupulous review process for any technical issues, drafting issues, and so forth. Clary pointed out in the review that it's difficult for us to review scientific proposals like this as far as lead levels and so forth, but less is more in these cases. And the fact that the CDC recommendations were in 2012 certainly gives me comfort that they're more likely reliable than they are now. So I would just, with your resolution, Mark, urge that we adopt it. There can be no harm by reducing lead and other toxic substances. And that's all I have.
Thanks, Jay. I see Seema has a hand, and then I see Shelley has his hand physically raised. So we'll go in that order. Seema, you're up, and then Shelley.
I just had a question about what the consequences were if a property is found exceeding the lead levels, the new lead levels.
The idea is that when work is done on a property that's contaminated, or when industrial processes generate lead as a byproduct, the amount that is considered safe to expose to the environment is the issue. So it's not so much, although if the lead levels on a windowsill, for example, exceed a certain amount and it is tested and found to be so, there would be remediation required. But usually this comes up in the context of new construction or something else that generates an environmental impact statement, because it's the rare situation where a person like Marty Rosenblatt will pay money out of his own pocket to do a soil sample on a piece of property on spec. I hope that answers the question. Shelley, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm concerned about the area. We're talking about a specific area, a general issue, but a specific area. If that area is contaminated, likely the school, under the school, is contaminated, and the area around Park West Village is. So I think as a follow-up, we ought to bring that to the fore, that we may be harming children and maybe harming residents by the knowledge we have now of what's on that land, which was one large piece of land.
If we succeed in lowering the standards, then any future attempt to develop that property would have to deal with remediating to a greater extent, and that should protect both the school and the residents, the residential residents. I'm not sure if that's what your point is, though. So
no, my point is certainly the area, if there was development, mitigation would have to take place and have to be checked out by all agencies. I'm concerned that if this is toxic, that what is under the school and maybe affecting the water, or air, or everything under the school and under the residential property of Park West Village could endanger people. And if that's so, that we should follow up, if this is passed or not passed, with some type of investigation or request for investigation to make sure that people aren't being harmed. And the fact that it was discovered on this plot of land is a find that was very important for a larger concern.
in
So
that
if your point,
community.
so your point is that once we, whatever happens with this resolution or these bills, that we ought to be following up on that issue either way.
In the broader area of Park West Village, which was in that area, which is a large area.
Yes, and Madeline put in the chat, and I will repeat for everybody that it's not just Park West Village for sure, because in order to get a comparison, when Marty paid for the soil examination at Park West Village, he also examined the parking lots at Douglas Houses and a couple of other NYCHA facilities to have a benchmark. And while the lead levels in the parking lots at Douglas Houses were above the permitted standard at that time, the one at Park West Village was even higher, which is, you know, a dubious distinction to be sure. But so there is more to do, and I accept that, and I'll be glad to work with anybody on that as well. Are there other questions about this resolution before? And is there anybody in the public that wants to be heard on this? There's only, I only see one public attendee at this point.
Call the question.
I think we're going to call the question. Steering members, and I hope you know who you are, by a show of virtual or electronic hands, please raise your hands to say aye. I have to do it visually. Okay. So I see, I'm going to give you a chance. In addition to the online hands, I see Stephen. Give me a second here. Stephen, Shelley, I've got you. Catherine, I see you as your hand up. I have 14. Linda, you're virtual, so you don't have to. Paige, I see your physical hand. Thank you. Let me see any others. Okay, so I have 15 plus 4 is 19 in favor. Thank you. So I'm gonna, let's see. Where is that lower all hands? There it is. Okay. Okay, so now anybody, hands are now down. Anybody opposed on steering? Steering members only. Anybody opposed? I don't see anybody. Anybody abstaining? I don't see anybody as well, and no one's precluded. So I have 19 to 0, non-committee, non-steering board members in favor. Please raise your hand now.
Hi, it's Audrey. I can't raise my hand. I'm voting yes.
Thank you, Audrey. So that's one physical. Beverly, let's see. Okay, so I have 6 on the virtual plus Audrey. And is there anybody else raising their hand physically? I don't see it. So I have 6 plus 1 is 7 in favor. So let's lower those hands. Thank you. Anybody opposed? I'm not seeing any. Julian, back me up if you would. Anybody abstaining? I see none, and no one's precluded for cause. So I have the resolution passing 19 to 0 and 7 to 0 to 0 to 0. Is that, Julian, you agree? Thank you very much. Thank you for this. It'll be on our full board agenda. The next item on our agenda is more informational than anything else, so I'll try to do this real quick. There is a balance of funds. You may remember for the last 2 years, the city council voted an additional $42,500 to each community board in the city. We have already used a bit of it for a variety of things. Remember that some of it was committed under Roberta's leadership, and some of it is still to be spent. There is a balance left. Among the things that Roberta put in motion are the employ of George Janes, a land use and zoning expert, who has been doing some consultant work for the board, some of which will be rolled out in the fall, and is a work in progress. And he will, among other things, be available to present to us, not just drop a report and so forth. We are planning to use some of the remaining balance to make sure that he's available to us to explain his work and to do follow-up, and to make sure that we have the full benefit of the work done to date. We're also planning to use some of that funding to employ the Beta NYC folks to do a few things. I believe it was under Roberta's leadership that we used them to create a database for a variety of types of information that our board, quite frankly, should track. Things like community-based organizations and how to contact them and how to share information with them. In my dream of dreams, every single liquor license applicant, every single sidewalk cafe applicant, their information would be put into a database. If we really go crazy, go nuts, we could try to do a crowdsource thing where every business on the Upper West Side finds its way into our database so that we could contact them when, there are issues involving a virus shutting down businesses, for example. So there are a couple of aspects of that. One is to tweak and further enhance the setup of the database to make sure it works. Excuse me. And then there's data entry. We need to hire folks to do some of the data entry to make sure that it ends up in the field so that when we search it, we get what we think we're looking for. And then there's an ongoing issue with respect to, so you know that we record our Zoom meetings. We're doing it right now. Those files, it actually generates two files. One is a video recording of the meeting. The other, by the way, is a transcript. It actually generates automatically a transcript. Whether you'd recognize the language of that transcript as being English is a different story, but at least it's there. And by the way, that's not just a nice thing. The governor's executive order 202.6, which allows community boards to suspend the open meetings law and to conduct votes like we just took on a platform other than an in-person meeting, requires there be a transcript as well as a video. So we have to save these things. Unfortunately, Zoom has limited capacity. And so right now what we're doing is we're saving it to a Dropbox account, but as well as on YouTube. But there's got to be a better way to do that. So we're going to use some of our money to hire the consultant to make sure that we're doing this in a way that is looking forward to, or rather facing forward to the community so they can find it without having to ask one of us. I think that's important. And if there's any money left over after that, we will consider how to make a donation to the right community-based organization to support their work. But my guess is that we're gonna use the budget for those kinds of consultants. So that's the update there. I know we started to talk about this, but needs have overtaken. And so that's where we're gonna go forward. If anybody has a comment or question or a concern about that, I very much welcome it. I see Rich Robbins with his hand up, and then anybody else. Go ahead, Rich.
Yeah, I think working with Beta NYC is great. I'm a huge fan of Knowles. I actually met him years ago as part of the open source community. And one of the key tenets of that community is that when you build any kind of database or software, it can be applied to multiple organizations. And so I assume that anything we're paying him for would be available to any other board. And I'm wondering if there might be a way of pooling resources with other boards so that they might chip in as well, because there would be benefits to others. So that anything that they create that's applicable for one community board could be used by multiple ones, and anything that they create for other boards would be used for us as well. And I know he's completely on board with doing stuff open source and making it shared. But I think that needs to be as part of any agreement we have with him. And if we can get other boards to chip in, that would be ideal.
I'll certainly raise that with him. I think it's also fair to say that because we were a little bit late in the party, now Roberta, one of the virtues of doing this is that we would in effect capitalize on investment already made. So Roberta very wisely had this database created and was sort of a state of the art at the time. And we just want to continue to honor that investment, if you will. I think at this point, it is also the case that some of the efficiencies of the work that's going to be done for us will be informed by work he's done or that group has done for other community boards. So I'll explore Rich's idea, but I think we'll at least have the benefit of efficiencies that have already been created. And now I see Roberta's hand. So Roberta, go ahead, and then I see Julian.
Mark, Noel and his group has created a database using Airtable, and we use part of it for our database, which took stuff that had been done 15 years ago and updated it. I worked on it very hard. I must have spent 5 or 6 days working on it. Courtney helped me at one point. We spent a good chunk of money. It's a really good database, and it works with all of the other stuff that Noel has been doing with the other community boards through Gail's office. So yes, this is something that all the community boards can use. Some of the community boards, district managers who are very tech savvy have used it to track all of the resolutions and where they've been and how they've been implemented or not implemented and where they stand. So it's a fabulous, fabulous database that can do wonderful things.
Great. So we'll just be building on top of that. That's what we're proposing to do. Julian, I see you, and then I see Christian.
Yeah, sort of building off of what Roberta just said. I was just wondering about how accessible the database is, and if we can access it now, if the public can access it, and how we can be using it, tangibly.
My understanding is that it needs some more work in order to be really useful. And then the most important part of any database is you got to put the data in it.
Mark, answer that. So
yep.
Right. Our whole point was that it would be a community resource where we would not publish it, but if an organization was trying to do some research about all the block associations, we might not be able to send them all the information because some of it might be private, but we could send them a list of every block association with an email address, even if they didn't want to have us send the phone number. We have a list of all the churches, so it's just a matter now of working, once we can get back into working together. Courtney and I had planned to do some work on it, but of course we can't be physically together, but at some point we will. And I would say in another year, it could be quite an exciting database for use with the whole community.
Great, and I think, and just to add to that, and then I'll turn to Christian, having experts help us get it in the best possible setting for that work would be terrific. Christian, please go ahead.
Yes, I feel that this is great information, but I think it hasn't been it could have been disseminated earlier and with more detail to the whole board. I would like to have a data task force formed where we can tackle some of those issues that you just mentioned.
Okay, I think we need to go forward with this proposal unless there's a really a strong concern that I hear in that this is expense money, and so it more or less can't be rolled over, or if you do roll it over, it's a very difficult process. And we're in this very tight budget cutting mode in the city council. So I do not expect that we'll get the same kind of allocation in the 2021 budget. And it's generally speaking a very important thing to spend your expense money in the year in which it was given. So that's and this has been coming together very late in the game to make sure that we make good use of this. There were a few questions outstanding about how much we owed to this one or that one out of that money. So I wanted to make sure that we didn't spend the same money twice. That's why it's coming to you now and in this forum. But I would be delighted if there were folks that were willing to work on a data or technology task force to do that.
Yeah, certainly will.
Thanks very much. Let's not lose track of that. Elizabeth, I see your hand.
Yeah, just a quick question. I think Beta NYC is pretty well funded, right? Like they have a pool of money that they draw down on, and Noel has been hired as an external consultant to community, I guess, to the borough. I'm just wondering, these decisions were made, and I think it's a great idea to do this, and I don't disagree with what everyone's saying. I just also am conscious that I think part of these decisions were made before COVID happened, and I don't know if there is perhaps a better use of that money that we could think about given some more immediate needs for the COVID recovery in our neighborhood. That's all.
We did start to talk about that as steering before COVID hit, and there was a resistance to what I'll call a charitable use of the funding at that time. But then the need to make use of what we've already invested in kind of surfaced, and then the plan that's already in effect with respect to hiring consultants to inform our land use work sort of came to the fore. So I think that this is, for this year, the most efficient way to make use of that. And quite frankly, we're talking relatively small amounts of money relative to the budgets of the not-for-profits that are so amazingly feeding our Upper West Side neighbors who need it and so forth, that I'm not sure that we could do a lot of good with that money in another context, much as I would like to show support.
Okay, I just think even if we're doing something related to technology, that it does have front and center sort of the recovery, and I think we can, it sounds like what people are talking about is going to do that with the database and other things, just conscious of the optics. That's all.
Thank you, appreciate that. I'll turn to Clary, who has her hand up, and then I'm going to move on to new business.
Yeah, I want to just follow up on a chat entry that I think Meg Schmidt just put in. If we have money that we can expand the assignment of our tech expert on, one thing that I think, and I think this is essentially what Meg was saying in chat as well, that would be really helpful, would be able to, for us to be able to research and find what we did in the past, never mind, and what happened after that to those things would be good too, but just to find our own resolutions, to find, to be able to do a word search in our resolutions, even a word search for the titles of our resolutions or the subjects. I had something come up today, Mark knows about it, don't need to talk about it now, where it would have been really good to be able to go back and see when over the years did we have anything that was a resolution addressing a particular subject. And the way the search function in our website works now is basically, it's worthless. It used to be better, but I think that citywide it was changed somehow. So I would really urge that we use a little bit of the money to tailor the assignment if we can, to allow us, or anybody else for that matter, to research our own history of what resolutions we passed, when we passed them, what their content was. End of sentence.
Thanks. I'll add that to the list of things that we'll ask Noel to be able to do. That's a perfectly reasonable thing to try to include. I'm going to end this discussion and thank you very much. Oh, Shelley, did you? Okay, go ahead.
New business.
Oh, good, new business. I know that Rich Robbins has a new business item that he wants to bring up. That's going to take a minute. So Rich, I'm going to call on Shelley first, and then we'll go to Rich Robbins, and then we'll wrap this up.
Okay, new business is very old business. 2.5 years ago, Transportation Committee passed a resolution to have a crosswalk on 106th Street in the middle of the block, going from Red Oak Apartments across to Jewish Home. It's one of the longest blocks in the city. People have use both facilities for day center and for senior centers, and a lot of people use it. If they cross in the middle of the block, it works. If they go to the end of the block, it could take them forever. In bad weather, it's virtually impossible, and it's certainly dangerous. And there have been at least 2 accidents that I know of. We went and had a petition because they wanted to show need, but we did it. The senior center and people in the community signed these petitions, signed these letters. We submitted them, and DOT came out to see the site, and they were going to follow up. The follow-up final date was going to be in March. I give them a pass because of COVID-19. But this has been going on for 2.5 years, and in some ways 20 years. And I'd like to ask and it was, I think, unanimously passed by, I'm sure, by the board. I'm asking the Transportation Committee to please put it on its next agenda. It affects people's lives in a profound way, and it's safety, and it's there are many ways to do it, including signals that don't require separate lights. There's a lot of possibilities, but the people there have been suffering. So please help our elderly in that area and people in general get a way to cross the street in the middle of a huge, long, dangerous block. By the way, you can't see from one end of the block, you can't see beyond, it's like a hill. You can't see the other side. It's a very dangerous block, which is recognized by, from both ends by DOT. But there doesn't seem to be an urgency at DOT to ever do anything. It's time that we did something as a board to follow up. Thank you.
Shelley, I don't want to preempt the Transportation Committee if they want to put it on their agenda, but since there was a resolution that was, as I recall, very overwhelmingly passed, wouldn't just a letter that says, hey, we have this resolution and nothing's happened, wouldn't that be appropriate?
That's fine with me, but I have a feeling that the letter will, then we should do that. But I think that there should be some reinforcement that at the committee that it's still a serious problem, and we urge DOT to address it immediately, if not sooner. But the letter.
Mark, if I can address it. Mark, it's Roberta.
Yes, Roberta. And okay, and then we're going to go to Meg Schmidt, the co-chair of Transportation.
Right. So we talked with the top people at DOT, and it doesn't meet whatever the state federal standards are to have a light. So we've asked them to be creative with it. And I think right now we need, we've been working on this probably for at least 3 years. And I think now is the time to really put pressure on DOT to come up with some creative solution, whether it's a series of speed bumps and signs. And, now is certainly, there's not much traffic there, but it's a area waiting for someone to be killed.
Right.
Couldn't agree more. I just want to do this right. That's all.
You.
So thank you, Roberta. I'm going to go to Meg Schmidt, the co-chair of Transportation, and then I see Christian's hand, or maybe I don't. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Shelley, for raising it. I completely agree. I think since there has been past board action and discussion with DOT on this, I think we should send a letter and otherwise communicate with our DOT counterparts in addition to bringing it up again in our July committee meeting, but get a letter to them out sooner than that in the hopes that they share an actual update or pressure them to share an update during our July meeting. And then we can talk about what we want to do from there. Anything we might put out of our July committee meeting, if we needed another resolution or some other additional pressure, we would recognize that that wouldn't actually get voted on until September full board. So I think more immediately, we need to get our letter out to them ahead of our next committee meeting in July, because we just met last week. So we still have a couple weeks before our next meeting.
Great.
So thanks, Shelley, for raising it.
Thank you.
Thank you. I see Christian, and then I have a thought.
Yes. If I recall, we had asked for an auto traffic light, which they rejected by what Roberta said. And maybe we can make another resolution, because this doesn't have to be a full traffic light. It could just be an on-demand when people have to cross, and maybe that they might be able to do that. But thank you.
Yeah, there's a history I don't want to bore folks with, but you're all absolutely correct that this is a need. The answer that we were given at the time was not satisfactory, and we should continue to push on this. So let's work on that. Meg, you and I can work on a letter for that, and then try to get an answer, or at least relight the fire. Thank you. So new business, which I think is the last item of new business. Rich Robbins has a proposal that he wants to make, and so we'll start to discuss it now, and then we'll see what is the right next step. Rich, take it away.
Great, thank you very much. Over the past week, as we all know, we got a flurry of board emails that were to the entire board. And I think having the capability of emailing each other is really essential, especially now. And I've always thought email is an incredibly powerful tool. And I thought that I went back, 20 of the 50 board members contributed substantively to the discussions, which I think, while it wasn't completely a comfortable discussion, I think it's really important that we do that. At the same time, there were 5 people who raised concerns about these emails. The first one was the concern raised that it was a violation of open meetings law. The second, concern about transparency and the public being able to see our emails. And the third, just about the volume of emails that 2 people raised. The first thing, and obviously the biggest concern, is whether it's a violation of the law for us to be emailing around to the board. And I checked on that both with the Borough President's General Counsel and with the New York State Committee on Open Government. And I got an email back from the Borough President's office, which I would have forwarded around, except that would just be yet one more email. But it was emphatic, and I'll read a little blurb from it, which said, "We have seen this issue frequently, and it seems to confuse board members often. Emails cannot violate the open meetings law because they are not meetings. A meeting is a gathering of people, all of whom are present, even if virtually, at the same time. A series of statements shared over a period of time is not a meeting. The open meetings law does not prohibit any emails or in any way limit or regulate the content of emails among members of a public body." You can also look at the Committee on Open Government's website that has several decisions that they've issued about the use of email. The one caveat that their decisions do mention is that if the emails are directly related to a vote, and I'll read here, "We do not believe that the transmission or receipt of emails or information by means of email would constitute a meeting or that the open meetings law would be implicated unless, of course, the response involves a vote." So as long as we're not voting or horse trading or bartering voting, there's no violation of the open meetings law. So having put that aside, there are 2 other issues. One is transparency, which is something I take hard as a very serious issue. And then the second is definitely hear that the volume of emails can get to be overwhelming, as can the emails, the reply alls telling people please don't reply all, which I think never should be sent. But there's an easy technological solution that we can do, which is setting up a Google group for the board. And the way it works is everyone either could be automatically joined or invited to join. And then anyone who wants to can opt out of it so that they don't have to get any emails, or everyone can personally adjust his or her settings to receive emails as often or as infrequently as you want. So you can either get every email directly as it's sent, you can get a digest. I believe when it's at 25 emails, you might even be able to tailor that to be the exact number of emails you want. You can get a daily digest, or you can set it never to email you, but you'd still have access online if you ever want to go in as a member of this group and view and even post to the group. So that's one thing, addressing the volume. So it solves the volume problem. The second issue is transparency. We can set it up, and I've set up a test site so that anyone in the public would be able to access the discussion and view all the emails. I recommend that we not set it up that the public can email us, because that could both be subject to abuse and get to be overwhelming. But we can figure out some other way that we can have the public join in conversations. So Mark wanted me to raise this. I think we should set this up and make it optional for everyone to join. If it's not something done as more of a quasi-official group, I still think it should be set up just with those people who are interested in joining, just to have a means for us to communicate amongst ourselves. So just want to put it out there and see if anyone has thoughts.
Thanks, Rich. I'm going to call on some hands now. Just to clarify, when Rich brought this to me, what I said is I wanted him to bring it here first before any facility was actually created or rolled out, because I thought it should be discussed first. And I thank Rich for accommodating me that way. I think Roberta's hand was up first, and then I'll just go around with what I see. So I see Roberta, Elizabeth, Julian, and Christian, and I think I see Catherine too. So let's go in that order. Roberta first.
I think it's a very slippery slope. I think, if I can't be at a meeting, or I'm out of town, or I'm busy and I don't see what's going on, and there's discussion, I can't weigh in, and decisions are made and maybe 10 of us can't weigh in. I just think this is not the way to conduct board business. I think board business needs to be, pardon what I'm about to say, above board. I think we need to have, you know, sometimes you want to send something to everybody and give them a heads up that this is an item of concern, and then have a meeting and have a real thorough discussion. But I think, you know, for the 5 or 10 board members that would not be part of this, it would be outrageous.
Okay, next is Elizabeth, then Julian, then Christian, then Catherine, then now I see Stephen.
Yeah, and Rich, I totally agree with the spirit of what you're trying to do, and believe it makes sense in theory. I think in practice, I look at it and I think about the people who work. I would love to be able to weigh in on conversations throughout the day, whether it's in a chat or an email or anything else. I think when we do not do that, it should not be perceived as us not being interested in something. And many of us work for a living and unfortunately can't weigh in real time. As those discussions were going on, I think you know, I think we just need to think about this before we do it. And again, sorry that I have a doorbell ringing and a dog barking. But I think what you're thinking about makes sense. But I really feel like our board has ways that we can communicate that don't require having to email 24/7 with each other. That's all.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Now we go to Julian.
Hi, I really agree with Elizabeth. I was looking at I've used Google Groups for a lot of the other groups I'm in as well, and while I agree that I think there should be no requirement that we have to, you know, look at reply all email change in order to be informed about board business, or important discussions shouldn't be happening there unless they're repeated at board meetings. I do think that I'm not so sure that after having this conversation, all reply all email chains are just going to end all of a sudden. I think there's always going to be, you know, instances where people want to reach out to the entire board and share information about starting a new discussion, or maybe have a mini discussion on the side. And whatever the case is, I think Google Groups are the best way to do it, not only because it doesn't require copy pasting an entire email list of all the board members, which may or may not exclude certain board members and can be complicated, but also simply because of the fact that, you know, board members can choose whether or not to opt into accessing the emails, whether they get one email per day or one email per week, or how they receive it as Rich said. So I think even if we're not changing, you know, the fact that, you know, these reply all conversations shouldn't be required, I think it's a good system to set up in the first place. Thanks,
Julian. Christian is next, Catherine, and Stephen is the order I have.
Rich, I like the idea to a degree. I think that it might work in terms of like, I think part of the issue of some people saying there were too many emails is that probably they felt that many of the emails were not necessarily on point or valid. But what I would say is that I think it would be good to use groups in terms of like, if somebody wants to discuss a particular topic, they can say, you know, this is the idea I have, I want to discuss it. It'll be on the group, you know, anybody that wants to join me, please join me. I think that's perfectly valid. I don't agree with having it give access to the public to that. I think that sometimes we want to have board discussions like the email exchanges for our own, and they should remain so. If the idea that was being discussed is worthy of discussion for the public, then we should bring it to the forum where the public can then participate. Thank you.
Thanks, Christian. Catherine, you're next, and then Stephen is the only other hand I see. Catherine, you're muted, so I think we have to hang on. There you go.
Rich, I think it's great that you're thinking and coming up with interesting and innovative ideas. I think we should just keep the conversation going. I think the issue is that if some people opt out or can't participate, then it's not truly inclusive. And I know that you really care about inclusion and transparency when it comes to communication. So if we were to do something like that, and again, I think we should keep talking, we we have to think about how to make it inclusive. And if it's too overwhelming or some people opt out, then it's not. The other thing that I think we should think about is etiquette when it comes to communication. So that we're encouraging more expression, especially from people who don't often speak up, and that we're not silencing or discouraging people from expressing themselves. In that particular chain, a lot of people were speaking in ways that were courageous and genuine, and I think we should think of ways to do more of that, and to have more inclusive dialogue. And I think that the way you're suggesting is a start, but it's probably not the right solution. So we should keep thinking.
Thank you, Catherine. Stephen, I see your hand, and then we're going to loop back to Rich for a final thought, and then I think we'll wrap this up.
Well, I'll be brief in saying I just echo what a handful of people said, and I think Catherine spoke about 90% of what I was going to say, specifically because it is a very specific set that's going to respond on a consistent basis on an email. Therefore, it's not a board communication. It is the people who respond quite a bit to emails, and anybody who's on the emails that I'm on there kind of gets the sense of that. So it's missing a lot of people.
Stephen,
and I applaud communication, and Rich, as you know, two of us. I just said I also applaud communication. So if there's a way to figure that out, but I just don't think board conversations. I actually think it's unproductive because of the exclusion issue. And the other two is I do think it's a little bit like the operator, where somebody says something, then somebody said something, and then by the sixth person, it's really not factual. I found there is a lot of disinformation being trolled, and then all of a sudden people go, wow, I didn't know that, and I'm resident to say, well, that's actually not really true, and let me write another email, explain and clarify. And I think a lot of people feel that way. I know that I saw some things in YEL that I'm just using as the last email that I thought were not quite factually correct, not purposely done, and I just didn't want to send another email saying, let me just clarify. So I think my point is I think that it's a good idea to think about communication, but I think an email chain of 50 people is not maybe the best way to do it. And I'm very support the kind of the thought about inclusion. It's not an inclusive conversation. It's a very specific set. And maybe that's good for certain conversations, but certainly not board-wide conversations.
Thank you, Stephen. And so unless I want to give Rich the last word on this. So if there's anybody else that wants to speak, now's the time, or we'll wrap this up by returning to Rich. Go ahead, Rich. Rich, you're muted.
I think a lot of you aren't seeing what I'm saying, and I'm not encouraging more emails. I'm not encouraging that we switch business from meetings to email. What I'm saying is that these emails are happening. And I think that for anyone to do an email to 50 people is a huge intrusion on 50 people's lives, and expects that they're going to read it right away in a way that really shouldn't be done except for extraordinary circumstances. Yet 20 of us did that in the past week. And we clearly offended some people who emailed around, creating more emails, telling people to stop emailing. So I'm not saying that we should do this as a means to have more emails. What I'm saying is that given that it's happening, we should allow it to happen in a transparent way, as a number of people said we should do. And I think it's just general good practice. And B, we should allow people to opt out. And right now there's no means to opt out apart from replying all and just adding to the issue. And if we set this up, again, it's not creating more emails. It shouldn't be abused. It should only be extraordinary circumstances where someone writes to the entire board. But if we're doing it, it should be done in a way so that people can manage the process and not be overwhelmed like we were this week.
So Rich, I'm sorry, if I could ask a question so that you could then comment it as part of your closing remarks. You used a couple of times the term managed, and that sounds to me like a moderator or some kind of, I don't want to say referee, but some kind of oversight. And I'm wondering how you envision
that each person, if someone decides that they only want to get a digest every day, they can set it up that way. If someone decides they never want to see it, but they want to be able to go to the website and look when they care to, they can do that. If someone wants to get every email real time, they can set it up that way. Right now, we don't have that capability. And unless we were to set a rule, never email the entire board, as 20 people did this week, we have an inferior system than what we could set up. And so I think what we're saying is, because some people don't like emails at all, we should keep the current system and keep allowing people to email all 50 people, when that's the inferior solution to having a system set up that works.
Okay.
And I don't think it should be used in any way to conduct board business. That's getting towards the issue of voting or violations of open meetings law. If we're using it in the way that the 20 people did use it this week, we should have some way that people can opt out, which we don't have right now.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for raising it. I hear a lot of concerns expressed among our colleagues. So I don't think we're ready at this moment to even test this. But I would invite a conversation among those who are intrigued by the possibility of this to work with Rich to see if there's a way to address the concerns that have been raised tonight before we go live with something like this. I'm happy to put this on the agenda for steering again next month. If there could be work in between now and then to clarify or amend or revise so that it addresses the concerns that have been raised. And I think that's all I have to say about it. So anyway.
Motion to adjourn.
If there's anybody who would be interested in working on this, you can email me and I'll make sure that to put, or you can email Rich directly. And I'm glad to be involved, keeping in mind everything that's been said tonight.
Motion to adjourn.
Linda, are you voting yes, or are you saying, wait a minute? You're done. Okay. I think we're adjourned. Thanks, everybody.
Have a good night.
Very good.
Night, everybody.
Well, good evening. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Hey, Louisa, you made it. Yay.